Welcome in. It's really great to have you sitting down with us today for another custom-tailored deep dive.
Yeah, glad you could join us today.
We are jumping right into a pretty fascinating, highly polarized cultural and musical shift, one that completely transformed a global industry.
A massive shift, really.
Totally. And our mission today for you listening is to explore the mechanics of how a single subgenre of music didn't just quietly evolve,
Right.
but actually disrupted the entire musical landscape.
It was an active disruption.
Exactly. So we're working off a very specific, incredibly potent set of source notes today. They're titled Dubstep Story E03. Brostep Explosion.
Which is such a great title.
It is. And just for the record, this source material is copyrighted 2026 by 786 Music LLC.
Good to note.
Yeah. But what we have in these notes is basically a blueprint of pure disruption.
I'd agree with that.
We are looking at this moment in time where a sound started in one specific geographical location, and then it mutated into something nearly unrecognizable.
And set off a massive chain reaction.
Across the whole global music scene.
Because today's deep dive is fundamentally about the friction between underground purists and mainstream explosion.
The classic clash.
Right. We're going to look at how art mutates. How entrenched fan bases react to that mutation.
And they usually don't react well.
No, they don't. And we want to see what happens when an intimate, protected cultural movement suddenly scales up to accommodate millions of people.
Which is a huge structural stress test for any art form.
Exactly. For you listening, the goal here is to really examine the sociology of scaling art.
Yeah.
This isn't just a story about a changing tempo or, a new drum pattern.
Right.
It is a classic study of innovation, intense backlash, and undeniable global impact. We're going to break down exactly how and why a localized sound was exported.
And aggressively reformatted.
Yes, turned right into a stadium-filling phenomenon.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the source material points directly to the catalyst of this entire explosion.
The spark that lit the fuse.
Right. The notes highlight a specific figure and a specific project, Skrillex, and the release of Scary Monsters.
A massive turning point.
Huge. The text zeroes in on the exact nature of the sonic shift. It explicitly highlights the introduction of, and this is a direct quote from the notes, aggressive wobbles.
Yes, aggressive wobbles.
And when the notes use the term aggressive here, I want to be clear for you listening. We aren't just talking about a DJ like turning the volume knob up on a mixer.
No, it's structural.
It is a fundamental change in the physics of the listening experience.
It really is.
Because prior to this shift, the foundational sound relied heavily on sub-bass.
Those deep, low-frequency vibrations.
Exactly. The kind of sound you feel more in your chest than you actually hear with your ears.
Right, like a subtle pressure.
Yeah. Think about a standard vibration, like standing near a large industrial washing machine.
Okay, yeah.
It hums. You feel it in the floorboards. It's an ambient vibration. It's deep, but it's passive.
You can exist around it without it overwhelming you.
Exactly. But what Scary Monsters and this aggressive mutation did was take those oscillating wobble bass lines and push them aggressively up into the mid-range frequencies.
Which changes everything.
It changes everything. It took a sound that was previously designed to be this dark, meditative, physical vibration and turned it into an abrasive, roaring frequency.
That actively demands your auditory attention.
Yes. To go back to the analogy, it's no longer the washing machine in the background. It is suddenly a jet engine testing facility.
A physical force pushing you back.
Exactly. It's like someone driving a motorcycle straight through the living room wall. It forces a reaction.
What's fascinating here is the sheer kinetic energy introduced by that frequency shift.
It's palpable.
It really is. Look at the source's deliberate capitalization of the word aggressive.
All caps in the text.
Right. That capitalization tells us this wasn't a subtle evolution. When you move the focal point of a genre from the sub-bass up to the mid-range, you're essentially weaponizing the sound.
Weaponizing the sound. I like that.
Well, a mid-range frequency cuts through the air differently. It sounds like a buzzsaw, or a revving engine, or a mechanical malfunction.
It's totally confrontational.
Yes, you transition from an introverted listening experience.
Where a crowd in a dark club might just be collectively nodding their heads.
Exactly, nodding to a deep rolling rhythm. And you shift that to an extroverted, highly reactive experience. The aggressive wobbles mentioned in the source material are designed to trigger an adrenaline spike.
It forces a physical reaction from the crowd.
The music stops being an atmospheric environment that you exist within. It becomes a distinct, high-impact force that you have to actively engage with.
It demands that you jump or thrash or move.
Right. It is a brilliant psychological pivot in music production. By injecting that level of abrasive energy into the oscillating bass frequencies, Skrillex fundamentally altered the relationship between the music and the audience.
The sound went from being hypnotic to being a full frontal assault on the senses.
A perfect way to put it.
And that auditory assault completely redefined the borders of the genre.
It had to.
Right, because the source notes take us immediately from that initial catalyst into the geography and the key players who carried this mutation forward.
Next generation of the sound.
Exactly. The text explicitly categorizes this new wave as American Brostep.
American Brostep.
Yes, and it lists two prominent figures right alongside that term, Excision and Zomboy.
Right.
We are basically watching a new species emerge in real time here. We go from Skrillex's scary monsters throwing the initial punch
to artists like Excision and Zomboy taking that aggressive blueprint and running with it.
Under this newly minted banner, the sound packed its bags, crossed an ocean, and completely reinvented its personality to survive and thrive in a totally different cultural ecosystem.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this geographical pivot is one of the most crucial elements of the entire shift.
It explains so much of the mutation.
It does. The source specifies American Brostep, which inherently implies a clear departure from its origins. We know from the later mention of UK Purists that the foundation was built in the United Kingdom.
Right across the Atlantic.
So think about how regional logistics and cultural appetites fundamentally change the DNA of an art form.
Geography dictates culture.
Always. The UK scene, where this sound originated, was largely built in damp, dark, intimate clubs. It was a localized, underground culture.
Very close-knit.
Right. Then you export that framework to America. And America has a historical, cultural tendency to supersize its entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. Everything is bigger.
It is a massive continent defined by wide open spaces, massive arenas, outdoor festivals, and a really massive appetite for high-octane blockbuster experiences.
Spectacle.
Yes, spectacle. So when the sound crossed the Atlantic, it had to be filtered through that American logistical lens.
Right, because you cannot play subtle sub-bass to 50,000 people in an open field.
The physics just don't support it.
Exactly. The wind literally carries the low frequencies away. You need those aggressive, roaring mid-range sounds just to physically reach the people standing in the back of a massive festival crowd.
Precisely. The environment dictates the evolution. The subtlety was stripped away, the mid-range was distorted, and the drops were engineered to be massive theatrical moments.
Built for stadiums.
Right. And that brings us to the term Brostep itself. The branding is incredibly loaded.
It definitely paints a specific picture.
It evokes a completely different demographic. The prefix bro implies a hyper-energetic, high-testosterone, perhaps college-aged crowd.
Guys in neon tank tops.
Exactly, which sharply contrasts with the original underground connoisseurs of the UK scene. The art form's DNA was rewritten by its new geographical surroundings and the new audience it was attracting.
Artists like Excision and Zomboy didn't just adopt the aggressive wobbles.
They built an entire aesthetic around them.
Yeah.
They leaned heavily into the massive, abrasive, stadium-ready energy that defined the American iteration.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
The friction.
The massive friction. Because whenever you have a localized underground subculture that gets exported, supersized, and rebranded for a massive new demographic, you are going to encounter intense resistance.
Inevitable resistance.
And the source material drops an incredibly heavy, emotionally charged sentence right into the middle of this timeline.
It really stands out.
It plainly states, and again, this is a direct quote, UK purists hated it.
Such a strong word. Hatred.
The source doesn't mince words at all. It doesn't say there was a polite disagreement over tempo or production techniques.
Or a gentle critique of the mixing process.
No, it says they actively hated it. This is where the narrative shifts for me. It goes from being a story about musical frequency to being a story about human emotion, tribalism, and ownership.
Ownership is the key word there.
When a localized underground scene gets supersized for American festivals, that sense of ownership gets violated.
Deeply violated.
The people who built the foundation of the sound watched it get handed over to a demographic that had absolutely no context for the original culture.
And to understand that hatred, we really have to look at the psychology of the purist, which is entirely rooted in identity.
That's so.
Well, we have to look at the tension between protecting the authentic roots of a movement and the inevitability of mainstream commodification. For a purist, Underground music is not just casual entertainment.
It's a lifestyle.
It is a community. When you discover a sound before the rest of the world knows about it, and you gather in small rooms with people who share that exact specific niche interest, it forms your cultural cachet.
It becomes part of who you are.
Exactly. The original UK scene was built on a very specific set of foundational rules. An appreciation for the space between the beats, a dark, meditative atmosphere, and a reliance on the physical weight of sub-bass.
All things the new wave abandoned.
Right. When the American Brostep movement took those elements, weaponized them with aggressive wobbles, and stripped away the subtlety to entertain massive festival crowds, they essentially broke all the unspoken rules of that culture.
It's honestly the sonic equivalent of gentrification.
That is a perfect analogy.
Think about it. The original architects build the neighborhood. They give it character. They establish the culture from the ground up.
They put in the hard work.
Right. Then a massive developer comes in, buys up the property, paints everything neon, and sells it to a completely different demographic at a massive markup.
Stripping the soul out of the buildings.
Exactly. It is entirely understandable why the original residents would feel a profound sense of anger. They feel like their sacred, hidden treasure was corrupted into a spectacle.
That concept of sonic gentrification perfectly encapsulates the dynamic here. To the UK purist, the artists pushing this new American Brostep weren't just exploring a different style of music. They were committing an act of cultural vandalism.
Vandalism, wow.
They took the name and the basic framework of the genre, but discarded the ethos. But it is critical for us, and for you listening, to analyze this friction impartially, because both sides of this divide are acting on completely logical cultural impulses.
It's not just good guys versus bad guys.
Not at all. The purists are entirely justified in feeling fiercely protective of their intimate, authentic creation. They invested their time and identity into building it.
It was theirs.
Right. At the same time, the architects of Brostep, Skrillex, Excision, Zomboy, they are entirely justified in innovating, experimenting, and finding a new audience that resonates with a louder, more aggressive energy.
They were just pushing the boundaries of the technology and the sound.
Exactly. The hatred mentioned in the source is simply the raw, unavoidable byproduct of a subculture colliding head-on with global scaling. It is the sound of an underground community realizing that their well-kept secret has been exposed,
exported to the world,
and irrevocably altered.
And the story doesn't end with that backlash. It culminates in a colossal, industry-defining reality.
The massive payoff.
Right. So what does this all mean? Where does this intense conflict and geographical mutation actually lead the industry?
To a very interesting place.
The final nugget of truth in the source material reveals the ultimate impact of this explosive era. The notes state that despite all the hatred from the purists, this Brostep movement brought millions to EDM. That is the grand finale of this timeline. The aggressive wobbles, the distinctly American branding, the artists like Excision and Zomboy, all of it acted as a massive, unstoppable funnel.
Pouring people in.
It poured literally millions of new listeners into the broader electronic dance music ecosystem.
Which is staggering.
We are talking about taking something that lived exclusively in the shadows and thrusting it directly into the center of mainstream global pop culture. It completely changed the math of the music industry.
This raises an important question about the nature of mainstream success. I want you to really consider the paradox at the heart of this narrative.
The trade-off.
Yes, the very elements that alienated the original fans. The loss of subtlety, the abrasive mid-range frequencies, the distinctly American Brostep branding. Those were the exact necessary ingredients required to achieve massive million-listener scale.
You couldn't have one without the other.
Exactly. The purists hated the mutation because it lacked nuance. But a massive global audience inherently requires broad strokes to grab their attention.
You need a hook.
When you are trying to unify 50,000 people from diverse musical backgrounds at a massive outdoor festival, you need undeniable aggressive sound.
You need a buzzsaw.
Right. The American Brostep movement provided exactly that. It acted as the ultimate gateway drug for a generation of listeners. Millions of people who had never previously engaged with electronic music heard the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled drop of a Brostep track and were instantly hooked by the sheer energy of it.
It totally lowered the barrier to entry.
How do you mean?
Well, you didn't need to understand the history of UK sound system culture or have an ear for deep sub-bass to enjoy it.
Yeah.
You just needed to be willing to jump up and down and absorb the kinetic energy.
It was purely visceral.
Exactly. And once those millions of people were in the door, once they were officially brought to EDM, as the text says, the entire infrastructure of the music industry shifted to accommodate them.
Exactly. And once they are part of that ecosystem, many of those listeners inevitably begin exploring the rest of the genre.
They dig deeper into the crates.
Right? They start with the aggressive, abrasive sounds of Excision or Zomboy. And as their palette develops, they might work their way backwards, eventually discovering and appreciating the original Purist UK sound that birthed the movement in the first place.
Which is pretty ironic.
It is, but the paradox remains. The mutation the Purists despised was the primary vehicle that ensured the long-term global dominance of the broader musical umbrella.
They hated the very thing that saved the genre's commercial viability.
The bitter backlash and the massive commercial success are inextricably linked. You simply do not capture the attention of millions without the aggressive, polarized mutation that caused the purists' initial hatred. The scaling of the art required the sacrifice of its original purity.
It really is an unbelievable sequence of events when you lay it all out like that.
It's a perfect case study.
Let's take a second to look back at the ground we've covered together today. We started with a very targeted set of notes from Dubstep Story EO3.
And we followed an explosive trajectory.
We really did. We started with Skrillex and Scary Monsters, breaking down the physics of those aggressive wobbles, and the shift from deep sub-bass to confrontational mid-range frequencies.
Weaponizing the sound.
Exactly. Then we tracked the migration of the sound as it crossed the Atlantic, transforming into American Brostep under the guidance of artists like Excision and Zomboy.
Supersizing it for the stadiums.
Right. We unpacked the deep emotional friction of the movement, analyzing the profound hatred felt by the UK purists as they watched their underground identity experience sonic gentrification.
A painful but inevitable process.
And finally, we looked at the massive world-shifting result of it all, the fact that this polarizing evolution served as a colossal funnel, bringing millions of new fans into the EDM world.
Changing the industry forever.
It really shows how every massive shift in culture relies on these intense, controversial pressure points to break through to the mainstream.
It is a remarkable case study in cultural evolution and the mechanics of the music industry. And as we wrap up our analysis of these source notes today, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to explore on your own.
I love these. Let's hear it.
We spent this time examining the intense tension between the creators of an authentic underground sound and the massive, aggressive mainstream iteration that ultimately conquered the globe.
The purists versus the millions.
Exactly. So, consider this. If a genre's massive global success and the influx of millions of new fans is driven almost entirely by a mutated version of the music that its original creators actively hate,
right?
Who does the music truly belong to now? Does it belong to the purists who birthed it in the shadows, or does it belong to the millions who scream for it in the stadium lights?
Wow. That is a phenomenal question to walk away with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We always value the opportunity to sit down and unpack these massive cultural shifts with you. Keep exploring, keep analyzing the media you consume, and we will be right back here waiting for you next time we have another chat.